the early hours of July 20th, 1969, as millions of people across the globe sat awake in dimly lit living rooms, a fragile spacecraft descended toward a silent world no human being had ever touched. Outside its thin walls stretched a landscape of gray dust and endless darkness, a place without air, without sound, without forgiveness for error. The descent engine fired carefully, consuming the last reserves of fuel, while mission controllers in Houston watched every number with mounting tension. If anything went wrong in those final moments, there would be no rescue mission, no second attempt, no way home. When the voice of Neil Armstrong finally crackled over the radio announcing that the Eagle had landed, the United States had not simply completed a scientific mission. It had demonstrated to the world a level of organization, technological mastery, and national resolve that would reshape the balance of power for decades to come. The path to that moment began not with American dominance, but with a series of startling Soviet victories. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, sending shockwaves through the international community and igniting fears that Moscow had gained a decisive technological advantage. The small metal sphere orbiting silently overhead transmitted radio signals that could be detected around the world, proving that Soviet rockets possessed intercontinental capabilities. Soon afterward, Sputnik 2 carried a living creature into orbit, reinforcing the perception that the Soviet system had seized the initiative in the new frontier of space. For many observers, it appeared that the balance of innovation had shifted decisively eastward. The United States responded not with panic, but with transformation. In January 1958, America launched Explorer 1, which discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, marking an early scientific success. More importantly, the federal government reorganized its entire approach to space exploration. Later that year, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, was established as a civilian agency dedicated to peaceful exploration. This decision reflected a uniquely American strength, the ability to mobilize universities, private industry, and government institutions toward a shared strategic objective while maintaining transparency and scientific openness. The real turning point came in 1961, when President John F. Kennedy addressed Congress and issued a challenge that many considered almost impossible. The United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. At the time, America had only recently achieved human spaceflight, and the Soviet Union still held the lead in several key milestones. Yet Kennedy understood that setting an extraordinary goal could galvanize national effort in ways incremental progress never could. The moon became not just a destination, but a symbol, a proving ground for a society determined to demonstrate its capabilities. The Apollo program that followed was unlike any peacetime project in history. Approximately 400,000 people contributed directly, supported by more than 20,000 companies and universities. It was a vast network of engineers, technicians, machinists, scientists, and administrators working toward a single objective. This scale of coordination showcased a powerful aspect of the American system: decentralized innovation guided by centralized purpose. Companies competed to develop better technologies. Universities trained specialists at unprecedented rates, and government agencies provided direction and funding. Together, they created a technological ecosystem capable of solving problems no single institution could handle alone. At the heart of this effort stood the Saturn V rocket, a towering machine of immense power and complexity. Rising over 360 feet tall, it generated thrust equivalent to dozens of jetliners operating simultaneously. Its engines burned supercooled fuels at temperatures and pressures that pushed the limits of materials science. Designing, testing, and launching such a vehicle required precision on a scale rarely attempted before. Every bolt, wire, and circuit had to function flawlessly, because failure in space meant catastrophe. Equally critical were the navigation and control systems. The Apollo guidance computer, though primitive by modern standards, represented a breakthrough in reliable digital computing. It guided astronauts across hundreds of thousands of miles, managing course corrections, orbital insertions, and landing sequences. Meanwhile, Mission Control in Houston became the operational nerve center, where teams monitored telemetry data around the clock, prepared contingency plans, and rehearsed emergency scenarios repeatedly. The level of coordination between astronauts and ground personnel exemplified disciplined teamwork under extreme pressure. Apollo 11 launched on July 16, 1969, atop a column of fire visible for miles. Within 12 minutes, the spacecraft had reached Earth orbit. 3 days later, it entered lunar orbit, preparing for the descent that would capture global attention. On July 20th, the lunar module separated from the command module and began its final approach. Unexpected alarms signaled computer overload, forcing quick decisions from both Armstrong and mission controllers. As fuel reserves dwindled to mere seconds, Armstrong manually guided the craft to a safe landing site. When his boot pressed into the lunar soil, humanity crossed a threshold that had existed since the dawn of civilization. The broadcast of that moment reached an estimated 600 million people, making it one of the most widely witnessed events in human history. The image of an astronaut standing beside the American flag on the moon carried immense symbolic weight. It represented not conquest of territory, but mastery of knowledge, engineering, and collective effort. For Americans, it affirmed that their society could transform ambition into achievement through education, innovation, and cooperation. For the world, it demonstrated a level of capability that few had imagined possible only a decade earlier. The technological benefits of the Apollo program extended far beyond spaceflight. Advances in computing, telecommunications, materials engineering, and medical monitoring filtered into civilian life, accelerating economic growth and scientific development. Unlike purely military programs, Apollo generated innovations that strengthened the broader technological foundation of the country. The investment yielded returns not only in prestige but in practical applications that reshaped modern society. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union struggled to match this accomplishment. Its own lunar program encountered technical failures, particularly with the massive N-1 rocket, which suffered catastrophic explosions during testing. Centralized planning structures made it difficult to adapt quickly or integrate diverse scientific efforts effectively. Although the Soviets achieved important milestones in long-duration spaceflight and orbital stations, they never succeeded in sending cosmonauts to the moon. In 1975, a symbolic moment of cooperation occurred when an American Apollo spacecraft docked with a Soviet Soyuz capsule in orbit, marking a temporary easing of Cold War tensions. Yet by that time, the decisive demonstration of technological leadership had already taken place. The moon landing had shifted perceptions worldwide, reinforcing the idea that the United States possessed unmatched capacity for innovation and execution. The consequences for the Soviet Union unfolded gradually rather than instantly. Maintaining parity with American technological achievements required enormous expenditures in research, military development, and space programs. This strain compounded existing economic inefficiencies within the centrally planned system. While the United States leveraged its investments into civilian technological growth, the Soviet economy struggled to generate comparable benefits from its spending. Equally significant was the psychological dimension. Early Soviet successes had bolstered the image of communist superiority in science and engineering. The American lunar landing reversed that narrative, undermining Soviet prestige among non-aligned nations and weakening its ideological appeal. Over time, the inability to compete across multiple technological fronts contributed to systemic stress within the Soviet economy and political structure when the Soviet Union ultimately dissolved in 1991. Numerous factors were involved: economic stagnation, political reforms, regional pressures, and military expenditures. Yet the long-term technological competition with the United States, symbolized most dramatically by the race to the moon, played a meaningful role in exposing the limits of the Soviet system. The Apollo program did not cause the collapse, but it helped reveal which model of organization, innovation, and resource allocation could sustain progress over decades today. The image of Earth rising above the lunar horizon and the footprints left in the dust remain powerful reminders of what determined societies can accomplish. The Apollo missions prove that extraordinary goals, backed by consistent investment and national unity, can produce results that redefine what humanity believes possible. More than half a century later, that achievement continues to stand as one of the clearest demonstrations of technological leadership in modern history. If this story deepened your understanding of how vision, discipline, and collective effort can shape the course of nations, consider supporting the channel. Leave a like to help this video reach more viewers, and subscribe to our Quidditos Dupada for more in-depth explorations of the decisions, strategies, and leaders that have shaped the modern world. Because behind every moment that changes history, there is always a nation willing to push beyond the limits of the known.